Okay, guys, now it's my top five worst, most disappointing games of 2016. Yeah, it's been one of those years for me. I would still say the year was pretty good for me overall, but I played a lot of games this year that either disappointed me or I hated immensely. So basically, I'm going to do first the top five disappointing from 5 to 1, and then the worst games I've played this year from 5 to 1. And I should actually preface this by saying, like, just because these games are in my disappointing list doesn't mean I think they're bad. In fact, I enjoyed, well, four of the games on my disappointing list for the most part. They were just disappointing based on my expectations, which it's one of those things where honestly, it's probably not a good thing to have like really high expectations for games because you can end up super disappointed, like I did with these games. And the worst games list, these are just games I've played. I mean, there's plenty of games that came out this year that are probably way worse than the games that I played. It's just out of the games I've played this year, these five are the ones that I hated and I did not enjoy whatsoever. Um, and if you like some of these games, that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's actually awesome. Like I'm glad some people would be able to enjoy the games that I hated, and I'm glad that a lot of people like were really surprised with how much they enjoyed some of the games on my disappointed list, for instance. But yeah, I don't want this intro to be too long, so we'll get started with number five on my most disappointing games of 2016 list. And at number five for the most disappointing list is I Am Setsuna, and this is a decent game. Again, this is not like a terrible game or anything. I just think my expectations were too high, and it was often compared to Chrono Trigger in the lead up to release, and the battle system is almost identical. So it was hard not to compare it to a classic like that, and it fell short in a lot of ways for me. There were a lot of strengths to the game, like the soundtrack, the piano-driven soundtrack I thought was incredible, for instance. And I do kind of like the look to the game and the setting, but the world itself in this game is quite small. The story really didn't grip me all that much. The characters were fairly weak, I thought. The battle system was okay, but I think one of the biggest disappointments for me with this game were the character progression systems, which I thought were just obtuse and just completely unsatisfying. I did not enjoy them whatsoever, and it kind of made the game a chore at various points. A lot of the bosses I felt were really spongy, which is, one of my biggest pet peeves in games. And the game just overall just didn't, I don't know, it lacked that special something. It felt like just kind of going through the motions, like a very standard JRPG. So yeah, it didn't, I don't know, I was expecting, I think, a lot more from this game. I also think the price, this game was a little too expensive for what they were asking for. I mean, it's, it's kind of a nice, short kind of JRPG experience, but I don't know, I guess I was just expecting too much from it, especially with all, like, the Chrono Trigger comparisons that I heard. And it just, I don't know, it just, something about it, it just didn't quite connect with me in the way that I was hoping and expecting it to. But yeah, not a bad game at all, definitely not a bad game. But I do think it was a slightly disappointing one for me. But again, like, it's at the bottom of this disappointing list, so it wasn't like a huge disappointment or anything. And at number four for the disappointing list is Mario & Luigi Paper Jam. And this game, not only was it disappointing, I actually legit, like, hated this game. Basically, like, Mario & Luigi Paper, the previous game, what was it called, Dream Team, I actually enjoyed. A lot of people weren't too into it. I think the tutorializing was, like, just a bit too much. There was actually almost a little too much dialogue in that game. The pacing was pretty poor. But the battle system was pretty fun, and the game, it's still, I don't know, it was still an enjoyable experience. Whereas Paper Jam, you'd think, like, combining, like, Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi would be great. It would be, like, this excellent thing. But no, like, the battle system here is still pretty good, but the entire game is ruined with endless, like, mini games. Basically, a lot of this game is toad hunts, and you have to do it in a time limit, and if you don't, you fail, and you have to do it all over again. And the entire game is pretty much these mini games, instead of, like, this adventure feeling that the previous games had. And then, of course, you have the papercraft battles, which are fucking atrocious. They control like garbage. And eventually I got to one towards the end of the game, and I just gave up. I didn't even finish this game. I got really close, but it was such an aggravating experience to me. It was so, like, nothing about this game was fun, and the good battle system was not enough to save it for me because everything you were doing in between the battles was just like horrendous. The boss battles in this game were actually really annoying as well. Like, they went on for way too long. Like, these were like ridiculously lengthy battles, and again, they were kind of like damage sponge enemies basically. I really wasn't expecting the drop off in quality from Dream Team to this, and I have to imagine that like Alpha Dream, the developers of this game, just don't know what to do with this series anymore. It feels like they're just burnt out, and they just put out these lazy games. Like the Mario and Luigi games have just gotten lazier and lazier as they've gone on. It sucks because that first game, Superstar Saga, was so good. It was such a good game, and to see the series just fall from grace like this is really depressing. And there's another Mario RPG series I'll talk about a bit later, but yeah, I guess this is on the disappointing list because the Dream Team I actually liked for the most part. So I wasn't expecting the drop-off in quality, and I gotta say, I'm probably not going to buy another Mario & Luigi game. This series has completely gone to shit for me, unfortunately. And at number 3 is Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, another game that's actually pretty good. But compared to Shin Megami Tensei 4, which was my favorite game of 2013, I think it was the year it came out, it was my favorite game of that year. So yeah, my expectations for this game were pretty high, a follow-up to one of my favorite JRPGs on the 3DS. And for the most part, I did enjoy this game, but the epilogue of this game, for like the true ending, completely, like, almost ruined my overall enjoyment of this game, where it was just like ridiculous difficulty spike after ridiculous difficulty spike, and then some of the worst dungeons I've seen in an RPG, like these extreme maze-like dungeons that take forever to get through, and they're just filled with such like annoying boss encounters and enemies, and it was such a slog for me. This epilogue, like 10-hour epilogue sequence. It was such a shame because I was really enjoying the game up until that point. But then it just became a chore, and it sucks because you have to do all this shit to get the true ending of the game. I honestly wish that whole part of the game was just cut out. And then it probably would have actually made my top 10 games of the year, but because of that, it actually ends up making my most disappointing because I was not expecting that level of like atrociousness at the end of the game. It felt just like a complete, I don't know, it was ridiculous. Now maybe some people would enjoy it, like the utterly extreme difficulty at the ending sequence of this game, but for me it was just too much. And those dungeons, man, like, oh my god. Like, I seriously cannot stress how bad those dungeons were. Just plain awful. But yeah, overall though, this is still a good game. I mean, the battle system is excellent. The characters are far better than they were in Shin Megami Tensei 4. So I do think it's still worth playing for fans of that game. But I can't help but be disappointed by the end result here with that just plain awful epilogue sequence. And at number 2 is Zero Time Dilemma, Zero Escape 3. Now, Virtue's Last Reward is one of my favorite games of all time, the previous game to this. And this was going to be like, this was the conclusion to the trilogy, the Zero Escape trilogy, my favorite visual novel series. And the hype for this one, I won't lie, I was really hyped for this. It was one of my most anticipated games of the year. And yeah, I can't help but feel disappointed with this game. Now, the reaction to this game has been interesting after release. People seemed to enjoy it when it first came out, but then opinions started to change on it, and now most people generally view the game as an extreme disappointment. I've even seen a lot of fans say that the game is straight up bad. Now, I don't quite agree with that. I think there are some really good moments to this game, and the second half of the game, other than the ending, really did grip me. But the structure of this game, the way it was laid out, was it was. I just didn't prefer it to like the timeline based approach that the previous game had. Jumping all around on this like kind of chart here with like characters kind of forgetting previous events. It made things a little confusing, and I don't know, it didn't quite have the excitement that the previous games did. The animations in this game are also fairly bad. Like, you can definitely tell the game was super low budget. I don't actually like the way that they went with cutscenes for this game instead of just reading text. I actually preferred the overall presentation of the previous games. This game, they tried for like this more cutscene driven approach, but they just didn't have the budget, I feel, to do it justice, really. So yeah, the structure of the game I thought was fairly disappointing. The first half of the game, I gotta say, I was just not as into it as I was with the previous games. The big thing with this game, though, is like the conclusion, how it basically ties up everything in this series. It's very disappointing how it all gets tied up, and talking about it too much would be basically going into spoiler territory. But all I'll say is that the ending for this game isn't very satisfying. It's fairly lackluster, and I've thought less on it over time. This is one of those games that, at the time I finished it, I was fairly positive on it, but as the year has gone on, as I've thought about it more and like started to like read forums about the game and look at kind of discussions about the story of the game, the more disappointed I feel with like the end product here. It's really kind of a shame. I also think the puzzles in this game were like not as good as in previous games. I found them actually far more frustrating in this game than I did the previous games. The atmosphere is still pretty top notch, I will say, but even that, I felt like the atmosphere was a little better in the previous games, and they reuse a lot of the same music from previous games, which is good. Like, the soundtracks in the previous games are fantastic, but I don't know, it was kind of lazy. Like, there wasn't all that much new music for this game, and the music that was new just didn't hold a candle to the previous games. So yeah, it does suck that one of my favorite trilogies ends on a fairly weak note. But again, not to say the game is bad. I think overall it's still a decent game, but I was really expecting this to make my top 10 games of the year. Hell, I was even expecting it to be one of my favorite games of the year based on how much I enjoyed Zero Time Dilemma, Virtue's Last Reward, which still remains my favorite of the trilogy. But yeah, I can't help but be disappointed with this game overall. And at number 1, not a surprise here, Final Fantasy 15 is my most disappointing game of the year. A game that most people seem to love. A lot of people think this game is one of the best of the year. And I don't know, it just didn't do it for me. I was disappointed in a lot of ways. Basically, my expectations for this game were probably a little too high. Basically, the two demos, the Platinum demo and the Episode Duce demo, I really enjoyed them. I thought they were excellent. I had a great time with them. And everything I read upon this game before release and all like the footage I looked at, it all looked great. Everything was sounding so cool. And I was really expecting this to be like one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. And I went, I played the game and I couldn't help but feel majorly disappointed. There's just way too many issues with this game, and I guess for a lot of people, they're able to look over the flaws of this game and enjoy it for what it is. But for me, there was just way too many problems. They all kind of just combined together, and I didn't enjoy most of the experience. Now, this game is not a bad game. It's like, I'd say it's like a decent game. But it's still probably one of my least favorite Final Fantasy games. Now, I covered a lot of this in the review, like all the things I didn't like in this game, but I'll just go through all the list of different things. I mean, I think the main thing is just the fact that it's this open world game that feels like fucking 15 years old. It feels like a relic in a lot of ways, like in terms of its open world design. It's incredibly bloated. Traveling around the world is a pain in the ass in this game. The side quests are all like MMO, like old school World of Warcraft levels of like dull side quests, like fetch quests, just go kill this or collect this. There's way too many of them, and they're just not fun at all. The combat in this game is pretty good. It's one of my favorite things about the game, but it's all the open world stuff that just didn't do it for me. And when you start comparing it to other open world games. It's I don't know, it completely falls apart for me. Um, like what else? Like the way the vehicle works, the way the car works is completely like rigid and not enjoyable at all. All like the constant interruptions, especially in the first half of the game, when like nighttime would appear. The way dodging works in combat, I was not a fan of. Of course, you also have the unfinished storyline that, of course, now they're going to try to patch. Really annoying there. Of course, the dreaded Chapter 13, which is like some of the worst, like one of the worst things I've experienced in a video game. Like, Chapter 13 was fucking terrible. And then, yeah, it's just like all these things basically combined to just make a thoroughly unpleasant experience most of the time. All the side quests like were just a complete bore, where I just kind of rushed through the main story, and then the main story itself, I didn't think it was all that compelling, and the fact that a lot of the story is just like presented really oddly, like through newspapers, and then like having to watch like the movie, the Kingsglaive movie, to really get the most out of the events that happen like before the game, and kind of like during the beginning of the game. Yeah, there's just a lot of shit in this game that really pissed me off, and it just, I don't know, man. It's like the great combat wasn't enough to save this experience for me. And as far as an open world game, it just, I feel like it just didn't take like all the good parts of different open world games. I don't know, it felt super dated in a lot of ways. It's got like all the bloat that open world games have, and those like completely unengaging, grindy side quests that just were not interesting to me whatsoever. And then, yeah, just the traversal. Like, it's this open world game where a traversal is a pain. Like, where a traversal is just not an enjoyable experience, which to me is a pretty big failure. But yeah, like, it was a very disappointing game to me. I was expecting more out of it, but it's not a bad game by any means. I think there is a lot to enjoy here, and I'm glad so many people were able to actually really enjoy this game. I know a lot of people that weren't too into it, based on the demos and all the like the pre-release footage, and then ended up coming away from it quite satisfied. A lot of people think this is like one of the best games in the series, and that's awesome. I'm glad people are able to get that out of this game. But for me, it just wasn't. It wasn't for me, man. Not for me, and it's a shame because yeah, it did ultimately end up being like one of my most disappointing games of the year, for sure. Okay, and moving on to the top 5 worst games of the year. At number 5 is Paper Mario Color Splash. Now, this didn't make my disappointing list because it was a follow-up to Sticker Star, and based on the pre-release footage, we all knew that this was basically going to be Sticker Star 2. So I wasn't expecting much from this game at all. And it was still shit. They barely improved upon Sticker Star, and in some ways I might even prefer Sticker Star. It's got all the issues that game had. The completely pointless battle system that is just a complete chore and always gets in the way of the experience. The Thing stickers, basically, from Sticker Star, although they're cards this time. The Thing cards that are basically this like trial and error mechanic. That's all it is just trial and error, and it constantly disrupts gameplay, and it's always a complete pain in the ass. You had a bunch of different varied missions, most of them fairly frustrating. For instance, the footage you're seeing here is like this cool haunted hotel kind of scenario, but they completely ruin it by having it be timed, and there's like no indication that it's timed until you actually fail it for the first time, and then you have to go and do the entire thing over again. There's just all that kind of design in this game. There's so many baffling, terrible design decisions in this game that I don't understand, like how they made it in the game. And then, like I was saying, yeah, before, like the battle system just always feels like a waste of time. Like there's no actual level up mechanics whatsoever. It's not really an RPG. Now, there are strengths to this game. The writing in this game is top notch. It's a very funny and clever game at times. But as far as like the gameplay goes, it's a disaster. Like the game is an absolute disaster. And it was just such an unpleasant experience for me overall. And it's one of those games that just got worse and worse. the more I got into it. The boss battles in this game are fucking terrible. Just complete trial and error. And if you don't have the right cards, you can actually just completely fail them and not be able to complete them. And you'll have to actually like shut off the game and then go back and get the cards you missed. It's just an incredibly tedious experience from start to finish. And yeah, it's a disappointing game as well because the Paper Mario series used to be so fucking good, and to see it fucking regress to this, from Paper Mario the original and Thousand Year Door to this piece of garbage, yeah, extremely depressing. And like with Paper Jam, this is another series that, unless they go back to the roots and do like another Thousand Year Door type game, I hate to say it, but I'm fucking done with this series. Like, this game was just, not good, man, not good. And the fourth worst game I played in 2016 is Star Ocean 5, and this could have made the disappointing list as well, because I've enjoyed previous Star Ocean games. I know this is a series that a lot of people hate, and Star Ocean 4, I know a lot of people hate that game, and I get it. The story and characters in that game are garbage. But the battle system was actually quite good in that game, and the exploration in that game was terrific. This game has none of that, though. I actually cannot believe the regression from Star Ocean 4 here. And that game wasn't like a masterpiece or anything, and the fact that this game is even worse than that in a lot of ways is totally bizarre to me. Now, I understand the budget is a big reason, but man, there are so many things like just wrong with this game. My good buddy Shintai did an excellent in-depth review on this game, like why it's such a piece of shit. So definitely go check that out. But where to start with this game? The completely like nothing characters that are just completely uninteresting and have like nothing to them. The lackluster, like lame story that this game has. The frankly quite clunky battle system. The terrible character progression mechanics in this game. The complete lack of exploration. There's one planet in this game. It really lacks the Star Ocean feel, like the Star Ocean scope that previous games had. Honestly, the kind of poor voice acting, the terrible writing, this game was just so unimpressive and thoroughly mediocre from start to finish. I did like how it was brief. It didn't last that long. If this was a 50-hour game, oh boy, it would probably rank even higher as one of the worst games of the year. But yeah, this game was honestly, actually, I should have probably included this on the most disappointing, but it belongs on either of the lists because yeah, this was not an enjoyable experience to me. Man, yeah. Again, though, check out Shintai's review. He does a much better job of explaining why this game is so bad. But yeah, rest in peace, Star Ocean. Yeah, I don't think this game sold particularly well, and with this game being so fucking underwhelming, I don't think we'll get another one. Which I guess I'm fine with, because if it's going to be as lousy as this, I just don't care. But yeah, Star Ocean 5, definitely one of the worst games I've played this year. And yep, at number 3 is Mario and Luigi Paper Jam. Yeah, a game that made both the disappointing and worst lists. Like I mentioned in my disappointing list, I hated this game. I thought it was fucking dreadful. The fucking constant annoying-ass mini-games, the damage sponge bosses, the fucking horrendous papercraft battles. The fact that the game, honestly, it wasn't even that funny as far as, like, the writing goes. The way they integrated the Paper Mario elements was like completely lazy. You had this card-based battle system type thing going on as well that I didn't like as well. Again, I'm just repeating myself here, but yeah, this game was a thoroughly unpleasant experience for me this year, and I had to include it on both lists. And at number 2, and it was very tough to choose between the top 2, but number 2, I ended up choosing Mighty Number 9 for the worst game. And yeah, okay, so this didn't make the disappointing because honestly, everything they showed leading up to release, like through the Kickstarter, looked terrible. This game looked terrible even before release, so it was not a surprise that the game turned out to be an absolute piece of shit. Now, on the Wii U, the game is pretty much broken and unplayable, which is the version I played. I did later actually try the game out on PC, and it didn't change much, but on the Wii U, the frame rate, it like runs at like 10 frames per second, and for like a Twitch-heavy, like side-scrolling platformer, 10 FPS is just, it's you can't play a game like that. Like, it's unplayable on the Wii U. It's completely unplayable. I cannot believe how like bad the Wii U version turned out. But the game in general is terrible, though. The main character is completely uninteresting. You have like these awful story segments. They interrupt the gameplay in a lot of ways, which like you should not do for a Mega Man style game. The level designs in this game are atrocious. They're completely uninspired at best, and then like tedious and frustrating at worst. Like the one level, like the sniper level, where you have to like chase the sniper through the level, is so poor. Like that's one of those levels that you could do a whole video describing like why the level design there is so terrible. Like it's actually kind of amazing how bad the level design is. When like Inti Creates, the developer behind this, I have to imagine that they didn't have a lot of input on how the game like ultimately turned out, because they did Mega Man 9 and 10, and the level design in those games was actually like really good and up to the standards of like a classic Mega Man game. But this game, it's fucking horrendous. The boss battles are like completely uninspired as well and not enjoyable. I hate the dash mechanic and how it works for the boss battles, where you have to kind of stun them a little bit, and if you don't dash into them in time, they'll get a lot of their health back. Like, that was like a completely tedious, unnecessary mechanic. Like, the visuals, like, this game looks ugly as fuck. Like, I hate the look of this game. And in a lot of like the pre-release stuff, the visuals actually looked okay, but somehow they got worse and worse over time, and they just went with this completely ugly 3D look. It's got some of the like ugliest 3D graphics I've seen in a long time. The soundtrack was alright. The soundtrack was actually okay, but like the voice acting and sound effects weren't all that great. This was, yeah, a thoroughly terrible experience for me. Like, I hated going through this. And I think it was ultimately super disappointing to me, because the classic Mega Man series is like, you know, one of my favorite game series of all time, and to see like a game inspired by those games but like completely failing to understand what makes them so good is really depressing to me. And obviously we have to talk about like just the complete Kickstarter failure here. One of the worst games to come out of Kickstarter, and it's one of those games that really, I think, makes people look at Kickstarter in a negative light, which is unfortunate because we have gotten a lot of great things out of Kickstarter. Shovel Knight, for instance, is a game very much inspired by the classic Mega Man games, and that game turned out amazingly. That's like one of the best indie games of like the past 10 years. And it's especially egregious when you like compare it with this and how lackluster this is. But yeah, I've gone on long enough. This game is a complete piece of garbage. I didn't even finish it. I got through like all like the first 8 stages, and then I just gave up at the castle stages because I was just not enjoying it whatsoever. And I ended up watching like a playthrough of this game, and the later stages look abysmal as well. The final boss in this game is a joke, like really, really bad. The game is also super buggy and glitchy. Like, a lot of people have run into like game-breaking bugs, and just like an endless like visual bugs, and like all sorts of different bugs. Pro Jared did like a playthrough on one of his YouTube channels, and it was pretty hilarious, all like the glitches that he ran into. So yeah, this game, yeah, it's a terrible game, and it's really unfortunate that it turned out the way it did. And yeah, it makes number 2 on my top 5 worst games of 2016. And at number 1, the worst game I played all year, Star Fox Zero. What to say about this one? Honestly, this is probably one of the worst games Nintendo has put out in years. And it's especially sad considering Platinum did a lot of work on it as well. The main issue with this game, I've talked about it before in the review, and it's what everybody brings up. It's the controls. The controls in this game just flat out suck. Nintendo calls them innovative, but I'm sorry. When you wrestle and fight with the controls through the entire game, something is obviously wrong. And I know a lot of people say, "Oh, you can get used to them. It becomes fun when you get used to them." But I don't. I'm sorry, that doesn't change anything. Yeah, it's like, getting used to shitty controls. You shouldn't have to get used to like these shitty controls. Controls should feel natural like almost immediately upon playing the game. Like not immediately, but it shouldn't take too long to warm up to them. But this game, I went through the entire game and every single optional mission, and they never felt natural to me, right up until the bitter end. And the actual mission in this game leaves much to be desired as well. It's not just the controls. There's like 2 fun missions in the entire game, and those are the missions that you're seeing here. The ones where you're just in the R-Wing and it's on rails. They work decently well, still not as well as like Star Fox 64, for instance. And you're still fighting with the controls a little bit. For instance, the way aiming works in Star Fox Zero is atrocious, where you have to look at the bottom screen to get an accurate shot. But the camera is shit on the bottom screen, so you can't tell where you're going or what you're doing, and you can't get a good sense of your surroundings. So you have to look at the top screen for that, but on the top screen you can't aim properly, so you end up missing all the time. It's atrocious, the fact that you have to constantly look at these 2 screens, and neither is ideal for controlling the game. You have all these shitty missions in this game, like the ones with the chicken walker, which control like garbage. The camera is terrible in those levels, they're not fun at all. You have the all-range mode battles, which is like where a majority of the bosses are, and they're a pain in the ass because of the 2-camera thing going on. Then you have those like really slow-paced levels where you're carrying around these robots to like activate panels. Like those levels are fucking boring, man. Like they just go on forever, and there's like hardly any skill to it. And then the optional missions themselves in this game that you have to unlock, they're among the worst in the game. Like they're tedious, frustrating bullshit. And then Project Guard, the other game that comes with this, because this game is super short. There's really not a whole lot to it. And yeah, Project Guard, the game that comes with it, it's terrible as well. It's this like really half-baked like tower defense game. Man, Star Fox Zero, I barely enjoyed like a single second of this game. Like those R-Wing levels, like there's 2 of them in the entire game pretty much, and one of them, like half of each of them are terrible because you have to go into all-range mode for like a couple bosses. The game doesn't look very good. I really don't think I'm surprised at how poor the game looks overall. The story is fucking like pretty much non-existent. I mean, Star Fox is never known for its like great stories or anything, but it's not particularly good here. But yeah, overall, it just basically comes down to the controls, the borderline broken controls that hampered my enjoyment every step of the way. I hated this game. I absolutely fucking hated it. And yeah, it was easily the like least pleasant experience I had all year. I know a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, some people do defend this game. They do like it. I'm sorry, I can't defend it. It's a real piece of shit. But if you did like it, that's good. I'm glad people do actually end up getting used to the controls somehow and getting some sense of enjoyment out of this. But for me, it was just, oh man, it was just terrible. Absolutely a terrible experience I had. And it really leaves the future of Star Fox in doubt. Like, what are they going to do after this? Like, all I really wanted was like a fucking normal kind of Star Fox game. Like, take the template from Star Fox 64, but they had to fuck it all up with these god awful controls. And then I don't think this game sold all that well. It was critically panned for the most part, and I don't think it sold particularly well. I don't know if we're gonna get another Star Fox game. Like, I really do like the original Star Fox, and especially Star Fox 64, but this series has been shit for so long. It's pretty depressing. But anyways, that's it, my worst game of 2016, and that will basically end the video. Basically, I don't really want to talk about 2016 a whole lot here in this video. I mainly covered it in the previous video, but I'll basically leave off with what did you guys think of this year as a whole for gaming? What were some of your least favorite games? Like, what were some games you played this year that you just absolutely hated? Did you play any of these games that I mentioned? But yeah, that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.